Climate change is advancing and sea levels will rise. How can people prepare themselves?
We need space, space for water, space for people, and building on water, building beyond the waterfront is a very logical step.
Are floating cities an answer to the challenges of climate change?
Technically, you can do a lot. We have platforms here sometimes that survive hurricanes.
Climate-friendly, resource-saving and floating living. Will everything get better on the water?
Floating technology, we need it now at scale, at an affordable rate.
Who wouldn't want to live by the water? Most cities with millions of inhabitants are located on oceans or major rivers. But the predictions of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change are gloomy. The world must prepare for a sea level rise of 1 to 2 meters by 2100. Cities, however, continue to grow. Will we soon be living on water? Architects have been pursuing this dream for decades.
Big architects have played with this theme, but I think the changes now that you go from dream to reality is because of the necessity. Because now with the whole urbanization, with climate change, we really need new solutions.
Koen Olthuis has dedicated himself to this vision and designed and built around 400 buildings on the water. As early as the 1980s, there were individual lighthouse projects such as this hotel. But floating city districts as extensions of existing cities have not yet been implemented on a large scale anyway.
And we see water as the ideal location where we can grow our cities and make it more safe, but also cheaper to build. If you have to protect your city with all these big walls for maybe 10 or 15 extra meters in the next 100 years, then it's better to already build on top of the water because that's safer and you can just move up and down with it.
Without coastal protection, a third of the Netherlands would be underwater. But that is costly. The gigantic Maasland barrage, for example, protects the greater Rotterdam area from storm surges. Each gate is the size and weight of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. We have been raising the dikes for decades, also in Germany, and the danger comes not only from the seas, but also from the rivers.
It's not just only about space or the fact that you can go up and down with the water and safe, but it's also the flexibility. We really think that our society is changing so rapidly, political changes, technical changes, and a city has to act to the new situation. But cities are very slow. If you build a building, it stays for 50 years or 70 years, and you can't change it. But on water, we can react very, very fast.
Koen and his team have designed the world's first floating city in the Maldives. 5,000 single-family homes for 20,000 people. The houses are connected to each other via roads, canals and bridges.
The ideal situation that we can just float them out, rotate them, and as a boat take them out to the main docks and change them and bring them back.
Maintenance is more complex than on land, and the bridges probably need to be repaired every 20 years. But replacing them is not so easy because the city's supply is organized in a network under the roads, bridges and houses. The houses float on pontoons and protrude about 1.20 meters into the water.
The price itself of a house, to construct a house, is maybe a little bit more expensive than building on land because you have your floating foundation. But if you talk about the development cost of these kind of structures, it's less because the price of water, the price of land below water is of course less than land in the middle of the city. So the total development can be much more affordable than building on land. And that's necessary because we don't want to build only for the rich. If you really want to solve problems in cities, same as in Mali, you have to build affordable housing.
The capital of the Maldives, Mali, is bursting at the seams with 250,000 people, on only 8 square kilometers. It is not uncommon for 10 family members to live closely together here in a 2-room apartment. Everywhere, air conditioners provide cool rooms in the tropical heat. Nevertheless, Maldivians say Mali is everything and move from the remote small islands to the capital, to where there is good healthcare, education and better job prospects.
I think Maldives feels the environment impact most from the world, and we've seen a tsunami and we've seen this sea level rise every day, and there's a need for us to expand the population in the small islands. So people started believing or wanting to see an alternative for reclamation or more safer way of expanding life on the sea in the Maldives. So we believe this is the right time. It will be viable and also practical.
15 minutes by boat from the capital, the private company Dutch Docklands wants to build the floating city in the 200-hectare lagoon of a coral atoll. The first 4 houses have just been completed. At 250,000 euros for a 220 square meter house, the costs are affordable even for the middle class. Later, the wooden houses will conceal modern technology, such as the treatment of the wastewater used to water the trees. Only the future will show how well the sensitive ecosystem of the coral reef can cope with the anchoring of the houses, traffic, and changing currents. In any case, those responsible promise an environmentally friendly and climate-neutral city.
This is exactly how it looked like. We have single-story or 2-story houses. We have sand on the street. We will generate electricity from solar or other turbines under the sea. And we will use the seawater to cool systems.
To cool the houses, in an energy-saving way, cold water is piped into the walls from a depth of 7 kilometers. This elimination of air conditioning alone reduces household energy needs by 60%. The remaining energy is supplied by solar cells and steam turbines in the sea.
This city has everything a city has, like football grounds, mosques, offices, everything. That's how when our parents lived, we could go fishing, we could jump into the water when we want, we don't need to taxi to see the sea, all that kind of thing. So this is more like a village, but used building modern technology.
The vision of a climate-neutral, livable floating city that defies climate change with modern technology is seductive.
I'm not very optimistic about how quickly we will be able to adapt. Is the technology like floating technology mature to be able to be used in countries where most of our country is the vast ocean? So it's an interesting idea, but I am very hesitant to believe that that is the solution for climate change, because the real issues that we're trying to address is reducing our carbon emissions.
Maldivians are forced to face climate change, which is mainly caused by other countries. There is no longer a real beach in Mali. The capital island is surrounded by a protective wall of concrete, as it lies only half a meter above the sea. The government already spends 30% of its budget on climate change adaptation, which means that not enough can be invested in education, hospitals and roads on the widely scattered islands.
I don't want to see a country that is uninhabitable in my lifetime. And if things go business as usual, that could be a possibility. But I still want to think that there still is time for us to reverse this and save countries like us. At 1.1 degrees today, we are experiencing coastal erosion on every single island. Every single island in the Maldives where Maldivians live have run out of fresh water. We are increasingly being flooded during the rainy days. We have more issues with coastal inundation now. And above all, our beautiful reefs are being bleached every year, because every year is a warm year now.
In Europe too, we are clearly feeling the effects of climate change. And our cities are also becoming more densely populated. For example, here in Amsterdam. The inner city is hardly affordable for average earners. Houseboats have been around in the Netherlands for centuries. So why not use the water areas of the cities on a larger scale? In 2010, a new residential neighborhood was created. 15 minutes from the center of Amsterdam, nearly 60 houses float. A mix of condominiums and affordable rental apartments. 12 years ago, Steph's parents also decided to buy a house here.
We didn't want to be in like a traditionally, like these neighborhoods of newly built houses. With all these houses next to each other with a garden on the same side. And he loves sailing and Steph loves the water. So that was then an easy decision to make to come to this house.
Yeah, especially the fact that the boat can be next to your house or in one of the slits down the dock. That's perfect. It's not standard and it is with water around.
There are neighbors
so
swimming by.
So you're watching outside the neighbors swimming by. Hey, that's a good idea. Yeah.
At that time, Sasha and Jan found it too crowded in the city center, and their son should be able to play outside on his own. On New Year's Day, even all the neighbors go swimming together. A village in the middle of the city. A great sense of community has developed over the years in Steiger Island. The houses and jetties fall and rise with the water level. Most of the basement floors are already below the water level.
So it's a concrete box, which is lifted partly with a floating plastic cubes, and they put them under to level it. Because one of the things that you have is that if I have more stuff than my neighbor, the house is like this. That's one of the reasons I think why we also have a lot of contact with the neighbors, is just to discuss things. Because if you put a piano there, then they have a problem. So. Well, a problem, but then at least,
something's rolling.
We have something to discuss on the barbecue.
Beautiful ice.
The water quality is good. The fish feel comfortable between the houses. In strong winds, however, the houses start to sway. The center of gravity is too far up. Architects would be able to plan that more stably today.
If you see how big the forces are on these houses, that's quite extreme. And in all honesty, I sometimes wonder how long this house actually will be here. And this house is 10 years old. I'm not sure if it will get to 100, to be honest.
The strong forces on the house have already led to cracks. Maintenance is more complex for floating houses than on land, which is why they are modular here. Components can be easily replaced, repaired, or recycled. How safe is it to live on the water? At the Dutch Research Institute Marine, scientists can create extreme weather conditions, using wind and wave simulators to test whether floating solar panels or floating cities will hold up over time. Olaf Waals knows how to brave the harsh conditions on the open sea.
I believe that from what we know from the offshore development, that you can do a lot, technically speaking. Like we have platforms here sometimes that survive hurricanes. So we make in this basin the wind and the waves and the current associated to a hurricane event. And then we look at the survivability of such a platform. Technically, you can do a lot. You have to discuss what do you accept as a cost.
The models of floating islands are also tested here because the dwellings shown here as cuboids have to be stable and safe in the water. Otherwise, the inhabitants get seasick.
You need to find either a flexible connection, then you allow for some motion in a big storm. That helps in a big storm, that you have a little bit of flexibility to reduce the forces inside the island. But if you connect them rigidly, then it becomes one big pontoon. and then it starts to move less. And that can be also beneficial, but at the cost of larger forces inside the island.
This floating solar array could make an important contribution to energy supply in the future, including for floating cities. The solar panel is actually 25 meters wide and 7 meters high, large enough to let waves pass underneath. It will one day float between wind turbines in the North Sea. The open North Sea would be a particular challenge for a floating city or infrastructure.
If you do this in the North Sea, for example, then the forces are still very large. If you do it with mooring chains, you need a lot of mooring chains to really fix the island. And we look into hybrid combinations. So you can make, for example, in the North Sea is not as deep, so you can do a reef, artificial reef, which is basically sand and stones which are mounted to the seabed, and they protect from the largest waves.
It's still very expensive to anchor floating islands in the North Sea without a protective barrier. Floating settlements are also more effective in protected waters. However, the development of flexible infrastructure is also progressing. A free floating airport is currently being built in South Korea.
We should not wait too long with the research, because it also takes time. Like all the big infrastructural developments in the Netherlands have taken about 40-50 years to build. And a lot of research was done before they were actually built. The time is now if we want to have the solutions by the year 2100.
German cities mostly follow the old protection strategy: raise dikes, wall up rivers. In Hamburg, this has led to the Elbe becoming even narrower, especially as a result of construction measures following the storm surge in 1962. The difference between low tide and high tide has already more than doubled as a result. The danger of flooding is increasing. It would be wiser to give the rivers more space, which would make life on the water safer in the long term, says Professor Antje Stockmann.
The first question is, how can this logic of always filling up land, of continuing to wall ourselves in, be changed in the sense of first considering on the land how we can build on the land in such a way that we also give the water more space there? That we set up flooding areas there, that we build there in such a way that amphibious spaces can be used twice, even if flooding occurs. A park that is temporarily flooded, but at the same time is a park even when it's dry. Houses that are elevated, that are on terps. There are many strategies that we need to think about much more consistently, even in the countryside.
Should we create more floodplains in the countryside and use them more creatively? Floating cafes like this one on the Elbe are still a rarity, yet they are easy to implement. Even on the inland sea near Amsterdam, people are wringing more and more space out of the water for new housing. Instead of floating flexibility, the focus in Germany and the Netherlands is still on stability. Also on the Maldives, the reef next to the capital is being filled up more and more. Hulumale is one of the world's largest construction projects to counter climate change and to create housing. Besides the 24-story skyscrapers, there are also charming residential neighborhoods. The locals call the artificial island Island of Hope because it is 2 meters above sea level. 80% of the Maldives are not even 1 meter above.
Today, it houses more than 100,000 people safely. It doesn't flood. It is not affected by coastal swelling. It's a double-edged sword for us because the impact of reclamation and what it has on our ecosystems that are really fragile. But also, what do we do with the rising tides? We don't have a higher ground to go to.
The consequences of the Hulumale fill are felt everywhere. The corals are also dying from the waste discharges, but the construction sediments additionally deprive the corals of the air they need to breathe. Former school principal Ahmed Said doesn't recognize the reefs of his childhood, yet they are the nursery and livelihood of countless species of fish.
This is all dead coral here. And it used to be a thriving coral formations around here, and all this has died now. Okay, there will be coral bleaching, there would have been, but largely due to the dredging, especially I believe the second phase, where the dredging must have not been very controlled. In any case, all this area had lots of live fish, live coral, but it's all dead now.
75% of all Maldivian reefs have already died, with warm periods of extreme weather doing the most damage. But landfilling is also causing coral death. Saeed complains that the population is not sufficiently educated about this. Floating cities, planners promise, will interfere less drastically with fragile ecosystems.
Floating cities, floating structures, floating technology, we need it now. We need it now at scale, at an affordable rate. This needs to come to the Maldives now.
The Maldives can no longer wait. There have been talks with the government since 2008, but the pilot project, Floating City, has been delayed until today.
The floating village would definitely be, right now, the best solution that we would have. We wouldn't want monstrosities like that, where we have you will probably very soon hear about lots of social evils and lots of things happen when people are congested into high-rise places. We've seen that happening in other countries.
Germany doesn't have to deal with such drastic challenges as in the Maldives. The problem here is that everyone wants to go to the city, but no one dares to take the plunge. Floating city districts are not planned for the time being.
Does it really make sense to say we're going to the sea, we're going to the river in a big way with new urban areas? Or is it rather something where you look at any form of land use on that? We flood certain diked areas, make floating greenhouses there. Think about how could we organize highly productive agriculture with the water, rather than saying we're going to keep it that way and additionally go on the river.
Not only residential buildings, but also agriculture could be designed in flood zones on land. Or the oceans on our doorstep could be developed as a source of food for floating or conventional cities. Regional aquacultures conserve overfished wild stocks. Biologist Martina Mühl and her colleagues are conducting research on sustainable circular economy at the Kiel Marine Farm.
If we now think about the future and imagine that we now live on, and even more with the water, and operate aquaculture directly on our doorstep, then I could imagine that you can grow fish there. And you would also have to grow algae, because the cycles have to be closed. But we're talking about large quantities. If we produce 1 ton of fish in one place, then we have to produce 7 tons of mussels and algae in another place, in order to get the nutrients that come in through the fish, through feeding and the excrement of the fish, out again in another place. Then it becomes a cycle.
The algae are grown and processed here in a pilot project. The sugar kelp not only improves the water quality of the Baltic Sea, it also contains a lot of protein and is increasingly in demand by the food industry.
The algae are very healthy and can be called a staple food. They have a lot of vitamins, minerals, and fiber. You can eat it raw or cook and fry it. I wash it again briefly and then I eat it, like delicious, crunchy salad. A little salty, but very tasty.
Once sown, the algae grow all by themselves, and the mussel farm also helps the Baltic Sea because the mussels filter the surplus of nutrients from the water.
The mussel isn't fertilized, the mussel isn't fed. Everything that swims around in the Baltic Sea, the mussel sips like a cocktail. It practically munches while it breathes. A single mussel filters through 2 to 3 liters per hour.
To save the Baltic Sea from eutrophication, however, it would take 6,000 farms like this one to filter out all the nutrients that are carried in via rivers along the Baltic Sea coast of Schleswig-Holstein, which is hardly feasible. It's different with completely closed systems like this shrimp farm. If you organize the food supply in a self-sufficient way, without contact with the environment, you don't pollute it. The shrimp swim in Baltic Sea water and are heated with the waste heat from a sewage treatment plant. In a research project here, the wastewater is purified so well by plant beds that it could be fed back into the Baltic Sea without polluting the sea.
A big advantage of this circulation system is that not only the water circulates, but also the nutrients in it. And it doesn't matter whether you do it in floating cities or in the desert. The crucial point is actually that I can open up new habitats with this kind of technology.
Malé is not self-sufficient. Almost everything is imported to the capital island, such as most fruits and vegetables. It would be no different in a floating city. Maldivian livelihoods, fishing and tourism depend directly on healthy reefs, which are being destroyed by land reclamation and climate change. Floating cities could offer a way out here.
I think that we're only at the beginning of these kind of structures on water. You will see that many more cities around the world, the 100 biggest cities around the world are next to the water. They will start using the water. And that will create worldwide flexibility. And I think flexibility means that we can react, but also it will be much more sustainable. We use less energy and we can react to any change for the future.
Environment Minister Schauner remains skeptical. Are floating cities really implementable on a large scale and mature enough to confront climate change in time? In any case, giving up is not the answer.
These are all very interesting ways we could possibly adapt to a warmer world. I think we can come together. And the reason why I say this is because we're just emerging from a global pandemic. And in 6 months, we found vaccines. In 6 months, we unlocked trillions of dollars. So the question is, it's not the lack of money or it's not the lack of technology. I wholeheartedly believe that the issue here is the lack of political will and failure to understand that the climate crisis is an emergency.
Everywhere there are people looking for creative solutions to address the threats posed by climate change, to live more sustainably with nature. The near future will show what contribution floating cities can make here. The Maldives and its fragile ecosystems are making themselves available to the world as a test laboratory.